Oh wow. Okay, nah. That's actually where they are. So yeah, if you're here like all day, yes, yeah, that's probably it. Because there's like a fence between the areas. That's probably what it was. I didn't even live it, so I didn't know what it was. Cool. I'm on vacation the rest of the week. I'll probably be back. Cool. Good luck with everything.
Well, listen, good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
And you said something was law?
Yes. It was started by Dan. Only careers left. I do. Consider myself local now. Okay. Yeah, great meeting. I'm sorry, you're Matthew. Okay, great to meet you, Matthew. Definitely.
Have a good day.
All right, thanks. You too. Yes, you have number. But you never know. Yeah. They'll do 4 forms and they'll do a long seriously, I don't think there is.
From no cigar.
Oh, so it works?
Let me know. You need me back up at the lunch break or something? Okay, cool. All right. Let me know. Let me know. Thanks. Bye. Let me know.
been injured, correct?
Yes.
And I believe this was covered earlier in your deposition. You actually received a text message from Mr. Depp, correct?
Yes.
And after you received that message, did you go directly to Mr. Depp?
Yes.
And Ms. Lloyd came with you?
Yes.
And I believe you said that Mr. Depp was outside the property in a car at that time, right?
That's correct.
Was Mr. Depp's security team there with him?
Yes.
And you examined Mr. Depp in the car with his security team present?
Yes, I saw him seated in the car when I arrived.
Did Mr. Depp tell you what had happened to his finger at that time?
Yes.
How long did you attend Mr. Depp outside of the house?
Not long, probably a half hour, because I needed to get him to the emergency room.
So immediately after meeting him at the house, you went with him to the emergency room?
Yes, I cleaned his wound to the best that I could with the supplies that we had, and then took him. So it was within a half hour that we left.
Did you return to the house after bringing Mr. Depp to the hospital?
No, I was taken back to my hotel.
After you attended to Mr. Depp and before you went to the hospital with him, did you go inside the house?
No.
So you did not go inside the property the day that Mr. Depp contacted you about his injured finger?
No, I did go into the house, as I had stated, that after I saw him initially, I went into the home to see the home.
And that was before you went to the hospital with him?
Yes, I went in to instruct one of the people with him to look for the tip of the finger, hoping that we would be able to put it back.
Was the tip of the finger found?
It was found.
Who found it?
I believe this man was their chef.
And do you know where he found it or where he told you he found it?
He said he found it in the kitchen area.
When you went into the house, did you see Miss Heard?
Yes.
And how did she appear?
She was certainly upset.
Did Miss Heard seek any medical attention from you for any injuries at that time?
No.
Did Miss Heard seek any medical attention from Miss Lloyd at that time?
No.
Did you observe any physical injuries to Miss Heard when you saw her that on March 2nd, 2015?
No.
So Miss Heard did not have any observable bruises that you saw?
That's correct.
And did Miss Heard appear to have a broken nose? Was Miss Heard's face swollen at all when you saw her?
Not that I was aware of, no.
Did Miss Heard have any cuts on her arms when you saw her?
Not that I can recall.
Did you recall seeing any cuts on her feet or any other part of her body?
I can't recall.
If Miss Heard had appeared to have been injured, is this something that you would have documented?
Yes.
Did you observe any broken glass in the house?
Yes.
Could you tell what the glass was from?
No.
Was there blood around the broken glass?
There was blood around the home, as I had previously mentioned, but I didn't specifically see blood on glass.
Where did you see the broken glass?
In the kitchen area.
And that's where the finger, the top part of the finger was found as well?
Yes.
Alex, could you please bring up what I believe was marked as Kipper Exhibit 17? Dr. Kipper, you recognize this document from earlier in the deposition?
Yes.
It's a letter dated March 15th, 2015 from you to Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
And you did send this letter to Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
Alex, could you please pull up what I've marked as document K, and I believe will be Kipper Exhibit 35? Dr. Kipper, do you recognize this document?
Yes.
And what is it?
If you could just, for my verification, can you scroll down to the bottom, please?
Sure. It goes on for 2 pages.
Yes, I'm familiar with this document, yes.
Did you prepare this document?
No,
Is this a document that was prepared by someone who works for you?
this was prepared by Monroe Tinker, who is a nurse practitioner who worked for me at that time.
Is this a record that's ordinarily prepared and maintained in the course of your business?
Yes,
And have you reviewed this document before?
yes.
When would you have reviewed it?
I reviewed it immediately after the visit, probably the next day. And I also reviewed this a couple weeks ago.
And I'd just like to direct your attention to the last page. Is this your signature here?
Yes.
And when would you have signed this?
That was confirming that I reviewed Mr. Tinker's notes.
Going back to the top, this is a patient record for Ms. Heard, correct?
Yes,
And this, where it says date December 17th, 2015, is that the date of this, that's the date of this document?
yes,
And the document states phone call consultation headache, correct?
yes,
So does that mean that on December 17th, 2015, Ms. Heard called the offices to report a headache?
yes.
And right below this, there's a paragraph that starts out with HPI. What does that stand for?
History of present illness.
And is the information in this paragraph what Ms. Heard reported during her phone consultation?
That's written. I was not there, but that's what's written.
States today the patient reports a headache after she bumped her head while standing up 2 days ago, correct?
Yes.
And a couple sentences below that it says last seen in the office on 12/23/2015. Is that an error, or did she come back in later?
No, I think that's got to be an error.
So based on this document, it's your understanding that Ms. Heard called the office on December 17th.
Yes.
Scrolling down to the bottom here, it says objective data physical exam. Do you see that?
Yes.
Does that mean that Ms. Heard came into the offices for a physical examination?
That's what it signifies, yes.
And would that have also been on December 17th, 2015?
Yes. This note reflects that visit. Everything in this note reflects that visit.
And so Monroe would have also performed that physical examination?
Monroe did perform that physical examination. I did not see Ms. Heard. Monroe saw Ms. Heard.
And the information below this heading of physical exam, which goes on to the next page, are these the findings from Ms. Heard's physical exam on December 17th?
Correct.
And if Ms. Heard had any physical injuries, would those have been noted in this portion of the document?
Yes.
And there are some medical terms in here, but so if you could let me know, does any of this indicate that there were physical injuries that were documented?
No.
Does this document indicate that a concussion check was performed?
Yes.
And what were the results of that?
Under the assessment and plan as written, Mr. Tinker did not indicate concussion under his assessment.
Under assessment and plan, item 4 says that Dr. Kipper is aware of the medical plan and is in agreement. That's consistent with your recollection?
Yes.
And I believe you testified you didn't see Ms. Heard on December 17th, correct?
That's correct.
How were you informed of the medical plan?
I spoke to Mr. Tinker by telephone.
And would that conversation have happened on the 17th as well?
Yes.
Alex, could you please pull up document L? And I believe this is what will be marked as Kipper Exhibit 36. Dr. Kipper, do you recognize this document?
Yes, I recognize it upon looking at it, yes.
What do you recognize this document
As an email from Ms. Heard to me requesting medical records for that month of December.
December 2015?
Yes.
And do you recall receiving this email?
I don't recall receiving it, but I'm sure I did, and I'm sure I reviewed it. Yes.
And you see that the email is dated August 8th, 2016, correct?
Yes.
And you have no reason to doubt that you received the email on or around that date.
Right.
On August 8th, 2016, was Miss Heard still your patient?
I believe so, but I can't be sure.
Now, I'm going to read from this email here. Miss Heard writes to you, as per our conversation earlier, is it possible to get my medical records from the month of December, please? I know I saw Monroe during one of my office visits, if it makes it easier for you to find. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was great talking to you earlier. Ms. Heard references speaking to you earlier in this email, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall having spoken to Ms. Heard before receiving this email?
I can't remember.
You don't remember anything about a conversation that you might have had with Ms. Heard prior to receiving this email?
No, I can't recall that.
And I believe you already stated this, but you understand Ms. Heard to be requesting medical records from December 2015, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Heard mentions Monroe in this email as well, correct?
Correct.
And Monroe is the nurse practitioner that Ms. Heard saw on December 17th, 2015, right?
Yes.
Did you provide Ms. Heard with her medical records for December 2015?
I believe so.
And do you recall what those records consisted of?
The one we just reviewed.
Was that the only one for December 2015?
Again, I would have to research your chart for that information, but I know at least it was that note.
Did Ms. Heard ever ask you for any other medical records?
No.
In the over 6 years that you've known Mr. Depp, have you ever witnessed him be physically abusive to any person?
Never.
And you've never witnessed him be physically abusive to Ms. Heard, correct?
Correct.
You've also known Ms. Heard for over 6 years at this point, correct?
Yes, although I have not seen Miss Heard for at least a couple years, perhaps 3 years.
In the 6 years that you treated in the over 6 years you've treated Mr. Depp, has Mr. Depp ever complained to you that Ms. Heard has physically abused him?
No, not that I can recall.
Have you ever witnessed Ms. Heard be physically abusive to Mr. Depp?
No.
Has anyone who works for you or reports to you ever reported to you that they witnessed Ms. Heard be physically abusive to Mr. Depp?
No, not that I can recall.
You testified earlier from questions from Ms. Myers that the tip of Mr. Depp's finger was found in the kitchen, found on the floor of the kitchen in the home in Australia, correct?
Right.
Where do you know where the kitchen was? Was it on what floor the kitchen was?
There was a downstairs below the kitchen area. I think those, I'm not really sure. I think those were bedrooms, but I'm not positive. So this would be on the main floor. The kitchen was on the main floor as you went into the home.
And that's where the tip of the finger was found in the kitchen on the main floor?
Yes.
No, there was a text message where you got a text message from Mr. Depp.
Yes.
And he said he cut his finger, correct?
I think that's what it said, yes.
Okay. And the reference from the emergency room said that Mr. Depp had sliced his finger with a knife, correct?
Yes, that's what he told, because I was present for that. That's what he told the emergency room doctor.
Okay. So Mr. Depp told the emergency room doctor that he had cut his finger with a knife, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you didn't put that in any of your notes that a bottle was thrown at Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
Did Mr. Depp have any cuts anywhere else on his face or anywhere else that would have come from glass? Now, if Ms. Heard told Ms. Borum that Mr. Depp had hit her in the face several times and sent her pictures of bruises, would you expect Ms. Borum to report that in her notes?
I would have expected Ms. Borum to send me those pictures.
Okay. So you would have expected to see those pictures from Ms. Borum, is that correct?
Yes.
And you would have expected, and you would have wanted Ms. Borum to, if she had seen a text that said, I was hit in the face by Ms. Heard and then received pictures of bruises, that Ms. Borum would report that to you, correct?
Yeah.
Is that an instruction that you gave to your nurses to report to you any abuse that they saw or were reported to them?
Yes, if they saw that as valid, Ms. Heard, for example, if somebody hurt Ms. Heard while she was under the direct care of Ms. Borum, and Ms. Borum documented that Ms. Heard had been injured, she certainly would have reported that to me.
That's what your expectation would be, that she would report it.
Dr. Kipper, did you keep any notes of your treatment of Mr. Depp while he was in Australia?
Other than the summary notes, no.
And was Miss Lloyd with you when Mr. Depp told you what had happened to his finger before you brought him to the hospital?
I believe yes. I'm not positive, but I believe yes, because she was helping me at the car to try to clean out that finger, which is when he explained what happened.
So you believe that Miss Lloyd would have heard Mr. Depp's explanation?
I believe so.
All right, that completes the deposition. And the next witness is also by deposition, is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor. Debbie Lloyd.
All right, well, why don't we go ahead and take our morning break. It's a little early, but since the next witness is also by deposition, why don't we take our 15-minute break now so you can stretch for a little bit, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes, okay? So you can go ahead. Do not talk to anybody, don't do any outside research, right? Okay, thank you. 15 minutes. All right. I'm told this clock is right today, so we'll come back at 11:25, okay? All right, thank you. You have that?
Yes, I have these.
Okay.
And then there's one that there's a disagreement on that we can address either now or later.
Okay, well, which one do you have a disagreement on? We might as well do it now before we go on to the next deposition.
Sure. So the exhibit is, it's invoices from Dr. Kipper.
What number is it?
I'm sorry, it is
1067, or defendant's exhibit 1067.
That's correct, and we have no objection to the document coming in. It's
Okay.
just we have a disagreement about the redactions.
All right, if you want to come forward, then maybe we'll take a look at the, and you said 1067, correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Bretterhoff, are you ready for the jury? Are you ready for the jury? Okay, I'll just make sure. That's right, thank you. All right, thank you. Nice. Just for the record, I assume, juror number 10, that that's your address to your employer because you need a letter from your employer, is that correct? Okay. So the court's going to do a letter for his employer so he can be released from work for 6 weeks. So that's what that information is, just for the record. It's just his employer's address. Okay? All right, thank you. All right, are we ready for your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Depp calls Debbie Lloyd
Okay.
by a video.
By deposition. Okay. Okay.
California,
Yes,
and you do not live or work in Virginia, correct?
correct.
Have you at any time spoken with, can you please provide your full name?
Deborah Lynn Lloyd.
And Ms. Lloyd, you live in California,
Yes,
and you work in California,
yes,
and you do not live or work in Virginia, correct?
correct.
Have you at any time spoken with Mr. Depp or any of his counsel, either in preparation for this deposition or for any other matter after you no longer work with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you recall who you spoke to?
I believe her name was Camille.
And do you recall when you spoke to Camille approximately?
2 weeks ago.
And what did Camille and you discuss?
She had asked me if Johnny had ever thrown anything at me.
And what did you say?
No.
Was there any other, was that the total of your communications with Camille?
That was the only time that I remember speaking to her.
Did you speak about anything else other than whether, and when you say Johnny, I assume you mean Mr. Depp, correct?
Yes.
Did you have any other? Did you discuss anything else other than whether Mr. Depp had thrown something at you?
They had asked if I would be willing to go to Virginia to the trial.
And are you willing to go to Virginia to be a trial witness?
No.
Did you, at any time, did you speak, and did you have any other, do you recall anything else you and Camille spoke about?
Not in detail.
Do you know how long the conversation was, approximately?
Approximately 15 minutes.
Was it over the phone?
Yes.
Do you recall at any other time having any other communications with any other counsel for Mr. Depp?
No, there was somebody else on that call, I believe, from his side, but I don't know who it was.
Do you recall if it was a man or a woman?
A man.
Did you ever speak to Adam Waldman?
I know an Adam reached out to me a long time ago. I don't remember a last name.
You're a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner?
Yes.
Can you briefly explain what that is?
I'm a nurse practitioner that specializes in psychiatry.
And did you go to, where'd you go to school for that?
I got my master's from Maryville University.
Is that in California?
It's in Illinois.
And
No,
I understand.
it's in Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. Sorry.
No problem. And I understand you're also a certified addiction nurse?
Yes.
And can you briefly explain what that is?
I had to get a certification in addiction nursing.
And what is addiction nursing?
Nursing that specializes in taking care of patients with chemical dependency issues.
And chemical dependency, that's drugs and alcohol?
Yes.
How long have you worked in those fields? Addiction nursing and mental health nursing?
Since 2004.
And would you agree that one of your specialties is concierge addiction services?
It was, yes.
What are concierge addiction services?
We would. A good question. I mainly deal with higher end clients and provide care, go to their home rather than have them come into facilities.
And would you at times provide 24/7 nursing care?
Yes.
And you'd also be a patient's travel companion for nursing care?
Yes.
And you owned your own company?
Yes.
And what was the company's name?
Turning Point.
Okay. And do you still own Turning Point?
Yes.
And what does Turning Point do?
Provides services. It's actually no longer, I still own it, but I don't work with it anymore. It provides services to either nursing or sober companion services to patients.
And when did you start Turning Point?
I don't recall the exact year.
Does anyone else own it?
No.
How many people work at Turning Point?
I'm the only employee.
And what do you have, contract nurses who work for you?
I did, yes.
And what does Turning Point do now, if anything?
Sits dormant.
Okay. And when did it start to sit dormant?
About 2 years ago.
Is there any particular reason why?
And that's when I became a nurse practitioner and changed my career path.
And where do you work now?
I work for Headlands Addiction Treatment Services.
What do you do there?
Nurse practitioner.
And is there a difference between a nurse practitioner and a nurse?
Nurse practitioner, I can diagnose and prescribe medications underneath a doctor's supervision.
So when you were working at Turning Point, or when you when you were working at Turning Point, were you a nurse practitioner?
No.
What was your title then?
Registered nurse.
And you performed work for Mr. Depp, correct?
Yes.
Was that with Turning Point?
Turning Point was contracted through Dr. Kipper.
Can you explain how that arose, how you began to work for Mr. Depp through Dr. Kipper?
And Dr. Kipper was his doctor, and he needed nursing services, so Dr. Kipper reached out to me.
And it's Dr. David Kipper, correct?
Correct.
Had you worked with Dr. Kipper before working with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you know when you started working for Mr. Depp, approximately?
Approximately, I think it was 2015 or 16.
Okay, and we can look at some documents, and that may help. Do you know how many patients you would work with Dr. Kipper before working with Mr. Depp?
That would be a guesstimate.
Okay. Do you have any approximation?
20.
And when Dr. Kipper reached out to you about Mr. Depp, did he reach out to you by phone or by written communication?
By phone.
Do you recall what Dr. Kipper told you he was looking for in regards to Mr. Depp's care?
Detox.
And detox from what?
Originally, I don't think I knew any of the specifics.
What did you come to understand Mr. Depp was looking to detox from?
Opioids.
Any other medication or any other drugs that Mr. Depp was looking to detox from?
Not that I recall.
Do you know if Mr. Depp ever took cocaine?
You can answer if you know.
I never witnessed him use any cocaine.
Okay. So, did Dr. Kipper contract with your company for care for Mr. Depp?
I don't recall the specifics of how we were brought on.
Well, okay. How were you paid?
Through Dr. Kipper.
Did you have to submit your time to Dr. Kipper?
Yes.
For Depp services? Okay. Did Mr. Depp ever pay you directly?
No.
Did you ever get any gifts from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
What gifts did you receive from Mr. Depp?
I remember getting a jewelry box and a, I forget what it's called, like a notepad, a fancy notepad, I guess.
It was, do you recall why Mr. Depp gave you the jewelry box? You can answer that.
I don't know why. I believed it was for a thank you.
Okay. And the same, you believed it was a thank you with the fancy notepad that you received?
It was at the same time.
Okay. Did you receive anything else ever from Mr. Depp?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Do you still do work for Dr. Kipper?
I have not recently.
Do you recall when you last worked with Dr. Kipper?
Not exactly.
Do you remember the year you stopped working with Dr. Kipper?
No.
Do you recall the last time you've spoken to Dr. Kipper?
This week, I think.
What did you talk to Dr. Kipper about this week?
He's my personal doctor.
Okay. So, did you speak to Dr. Kipper at all about this case?
No.
Have you ever spoken to Dr. Kipper about your deposition?
No.
Have you ever spoken to Dr. Kipper about his deposition?
Yes.
And you know who Erin Borum is, correct?
Yes.
And who is she?
She's a nurse that worked with us.
And Ms. Borum worked for Turning Point, is that right?
Yes.
And she, and did you hire Ms. Borum?
Yes.
Was Ms. Borum a salaried employee of Turning Point?
No.
So Ms. Borum was a contract attorney, a contract employee for Turning Point, correct?
Correct.
So how, in kind of general sense, how did that work with Ms. Borum and Turning Point?
Objection B.
If you needed her for a particular case, you'd hire her for that case?
Yes.
Okay. And you're saying, your testimony is that you had hired Ms. Borum previously for other patients, is that right? Before Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
Yes.
Okay. And do you recall how Ms. Borum came to work for Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
And do you recall how Ms. Borum came to work for Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
Yes.
How did that happen? What happened?
I was taking care of Johnny and Amber. It was decided that Amber needed some support, so I brought her in for Amber.
So were you Mr. Depp's primary nurse?
Yes.
And was Ms. Borum Amber's primary nurse?
Yes.
And would you ever share responsibilities where Ms. Borum would perform nursing care for Mr. Depp and you would perform nursing care for Amber?
I know Erin covered for me a few times. I do not believe I ever cared for Amber.
And you said that a decision was made that Amber needed nursing care?
Yes.
Who made that decision?
I don't recall.
Can we put up attachment 2 and we'll call this Lloyd Exhibit 1?
And stand by.
Thanks.
Exhibit 1.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Lloyd Exhibit 1. You'll see it's many pages, and we're going to go through some of these during the day. But just looking at it, do you recognize what this is?
Yes.
And what is Lloyd Exhibit 1?
My nursing notes.
Okay. And so these are notes that you created?
Yes.
And these are notes you created for your care of Mr. Depp, is that right?
Correct.
And if at a break you want to go over, see the whole thing, I'm happy to let you do that, just to save time rather than having you read 123 pages. But did you create these notes in the ordinary course of business?
Can you clarify what that means?
You created these notes as part of your job of being a nurse, correct?
Yes.
Did Dr. Kipper ask you to keep these notes?
We just keep notes as nurses. I don't recall.
So this is your normal practice, keeping these notes. It's not particular to Mr. Depp, correct?
Correct.
Did you receive any training into how to keep these notes?
Nursing school.
Okay. And the notes are typed, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you bring a laptop with you when you were working with Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Well, let's just go to the first one. It says June 12th, 2014, 2300. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And 2300, that's military time, correct?
Yes.
So that's 11 p.m. at night?
Yes.
Okay. And it says RN and MD met with patient to discuss plan and medication regime. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. The RN is you, correct?
Correct.
And the MD is Dr. Kipper?
Correct.
And the patient is Mr. Depp, right?
Correct.
Okay. So where it says 6/12/14 at 2300, is that when you met with Mr. Depp, or is that when you wrote up the note?
That's when I wrote up the note.
Okay. So you may have met with Mr. Depp at some other time before this?
Sometime during that day.
Okay. So the time you have here is when you wrote the note?
Correct.
Okay. And would you typically type the notes as opposed to writing notes in handwriting and then typing notes?
Correct.
Okay. Did anyone review the notes?
You can answer if you know.
Notes were sent to Dr. Kipper.
How often would you send the notes to Dr. Kipper?
I don't recall.
And was there a system where he could see the notes, or did you email him, Dr. Kipper, the notes?
Email.
Okay. So, is it your understanding, based on these notes, that the first time you met Mr. Depp was on June 12th, 2014?
Yes.
And if we scroll down to the 6/13/14, this says you met with patient in his apartment, correct?
Correct.
So the next day you met with Mr. Depp in his apartment, is that right?
According to my notes, I don't recall.
Okay. And in the second line, you write, he stated that he initially started taking opiates after some dental work and became dependent on them. Is that something that Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes.
Would there be a reason you would write that if Mr. Depp did not tell you that?
No.
Okay. And then you write, patient is fearful of coming off of opiates, but knows it's what he needs to do. So again, that's something, according to your notes, that Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes, yes.
And then it says, patient also expressed some emotional trauma which causes him depression and anxiety. Again, according to your notes, that's what Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes, yes.
Do you recall at all what the emotional trauma was that was causing Mr. Depp depression and anxiety?
I do not recall.
Let me ask this again. Do you recall what the plan was for Mr. Depp's detox as of the end of June 2014?
Plan in what regards?
Where was Mr. Depp's detox going to take place?
I don't remember when it was determined, but I remember that it was after filming. We would go to the island.
And that's the island that Mr. Depp owns?
Yes.
And you went to the island, correct?
Correct.
Who else was on the island in this time when Mr. Depp was doing the detox?
You can answer if you know.
I know I was there. I cannot remember if Amber was there the entire time, and some of Johnny's staff, and Dr. Kipper came at some point.
Okay. How did you get to Mr. Depp's island?
Flew.
And then what, do you take a boat to his island?
Yes.
Okay. And if we go to, in the same document, Kipper 69, which I believe is page 17. You see where it says 8/8/14,
Yes.
and it says arrived on island today.
Yes.
Does that mean that you arrived on the island on August 8th, 2014?
According to my notes.
Okay. And on August 9th, 2014, it says patient expressed fears of never feeling normal without his drugs. You wrote that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that something that Mr. Depp told you?
According to my notes, yes.
And if we go 2 pages to Kipper 71. Oh, you can, yeah, there we go. You see where it says at the top, MD's flight has been canceled.
Yes.
Arrangements are being made for him to arrive on the island 8/12/14.
Yes.
So according to your notes, Dr. Kipper, after the flight was canceled, was set to arrive on the island on August 12th, 2014.
According to my notes.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you it's been marked as Lloyd Exhibit 2, which is ALH 16110 through 113. Do you remember texting with Amber at all while you were on the island with Mr. Depp?
That is some of how we communicated, yes.
And does this refresh your recollection that Amber was, at least at some point, on the island with Mr. Depp during the detox?
Yes.
The gray part of the text is your text, correct?
Yes.
And the blue is Amber?
Yes.
And is in the gray part of the text where it shows a phone number there, is that your cell phone number?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 3, text message chain between you and Amber Heard on August 16th, 2014. And again, in the gray box where it shows a phone number, that's your phone number, correct?
Correct.
And this, Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Lloyd Exhibit 4, text message chain between you and Amber on August 18th, 2014. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when on the island Amber would be telling you how Mr. Depp was doing?
According to these texts, that's what was happening, yes.
Do you recall how long you were on the island?
I do not.
Okay. In a day, do you recall how long you would see Mr. Depp?
It varied.
Would there be reasons why it varied as to how long you'd see Mr. Depp in a day?
I don't recall how it was determined.
How far away were you from where Mr. Depp was staying?
5 to 10 minutes.
By foot or by some other transportation?
By a John Deere tractor.
Okay. And what type of place were you staying in on the island?
It was a yurt.
Okay. And were you staying with anyone?
I was by myself some of the time, and then Dr. Kipper was also in the yurt for some of the time.
Okay. And did the yurt have separate rooms?
Yes.
And would you typically eat with Mr. Depp?
Varied.
And what was when you were on the island, what was your role in terms of Mr. Depp's detox?
Medication management.
And what do you mean by medication management?
To administer medications.
And was Dr. Kipper the person who was prescribing the medications?
Yes.
Did, as part of the medication management, did Mr. Depp get a bag of meds? You can answer to the extent you know.
Did I give Mr. Depp a bag of medications?
Either you or Dr. Kipper?
Not that I recall.
Staying on this last page for a second of Lloyd 4, the picture of looks like a pill box, right?
Correct.
Would you have provided either Mr. Depp or Ms. Heard Mr. Depp's medications in a box like this?
Yes.
Okay, well, why don't we actually just take a break for this moment? We've been about an hour. Take a, I don't know, 5-minute break? Is there any reason to believe where you wrote RN received text from fiance that's not a text you received from Amber Heard?
No.
Lloyd Exhibit 5 is a chart of text messages we received in a production from Mr. Depp. It is Depp 7819. You see the second entry, entry 131.
Yes.
Okay. And where in the third row, there's your name, and above that name is a phone number. Is that your phone number?
Yes.
And you would sometimes text message with Mr. Depp too, correct?
Correct.
You see, it says in the body on that row 131, I will come by 80 within an hour to drop meds off just in case. How are you feeling? Your head back on straight. Do you see that?
I see that.
Okay. And this was a text you wrote to Mr. Depp?
According to this.
Right. Do you recall, as of around August 26, 2014, what you meant by your head back on straight?
I don't recall.
And then Mr. Depp responded to you see in the next row? Pretty much, I don't have the ability to take anything more on my back right now. I'm fucking strong. If my arm is gangrenous, I would cut the fucker off. I'm threatened by the love I feel. I need to stop. Simple math. Do you recall receiving that text from Mr. Depp?
I don't recall. No, I don't recall receiving that.
Okay. Do you have any reason to believe you did not receive this text from Mr. Depp?
No.
If we go back to Exhibit 1, and if you can go to Kipper 101, and you see where it says 0125 under September 22nd, 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And you wrote, RN received text from patient stating that he'd been in an argument with fiance, and she, quote, had a nasty freak out, end quote, and he would like RN to come give him some, quote, some fucking knockout yum yum. RN instructed patient to take PRN Neurontin 300 milligrams, PRN and Seroquel 50 milligrams, and that RN was on her way over. You wrote that?
Yes.
Do you recall anything about what the nasty freak out that Mr. Depp was referring to about Amber?
I do not recall.
And then you see the note for 3:30 for September 22nd, 2014?
Yes.
Okay. And again, that's 3:30 in the morning, right?
Correct.
And you wrote, upon arriving at the home, patient was sitting in kitchen with scraped and bloody knuckles on right hand. Patient stated he'd punched whiteboard in kitchen after fight. Patient stated he'd been texting his friend explaining why he didn't show up to play music, and fiance got upset that he was not giving her enough support, and the fight escalated from there. You wrote that note?
According to this, yes.
Do you recall going to Mr. Depp's home and seeing him with scraped and bloody knuckles on his right hand?
I do not recall.
Do you ever recall any incident where Mr. Depp had claimed he punched a whiteboard in the kitchen?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to believe where you wrote that upon arriving at the home, patient was sitting in kitchen with scraped and bloody knuckles on right hand? Would you have written that based on your observation of Mr. Depp?
Yes.
On Kipper 111, there's a highlighted note at 1930 for October 14th. Do you see that?
Oh wait, 1 minute. Yes.
Okay. And you wrote, a patient finished filming and was extremely agitated leaving the set. Patient kicked in the door of his trailer and refused to speak to director. Patient was verbally aggressive to another person on the set. For no apparent reason. Per MD, patient is to take Xanax 2 milligrams to reduce his agitation at this time. You wrote that?
According to these notes, yes.
And were these notes based on your observation of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Did you ever attend filming where Mr. Depp was filming?
Yes.
Where you wrote patient kicked in the door of his trailer and refused to speak to director, that's based on your observation of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
And where you wrote patient was verbally aggressive to another person on the set, so no apparent reason. Do you recall what that's based on?
I do not.
Would it have been based on anything other than your observation of Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
If you had been told that Mr. Depp was verbally aggressive, would you have written that in your note?
I don't recall.
And the note above it for 1630, you see that?
Yes.
You wrote RN and MD arrived on set to assess patient. So that's you and Dr. Kipper, correct?
Correct.
And you wrote patient appeared agitated and was short towards RN. You wrote that?
According to this, yes.
And where you wrote patient appeared agitated and was short towards RN, meaning Mr. Depp was short towards you, correct?
I don't remember.
That's what the note means, right? Is there a
That's
reason?
what it says, yes.
Okay. And this note would have been based on your observation of Mr. Depp at the time, correct?
I don't remember.
And then you see under October 15th, there's another highlighted entry, correct?
Yeah.
And you wrote patient awake and states he slept from 2200 to 4:30. You see that?
Yes.
Patient continues to be agitated about work and is verbalizing having desire to escape with drugs. You wrote that?
It's in my notes.
And that would mean that you wrote that note, correct?
Correct.
And you would have written that note based off Mr. Depp telling you he had a desire to escape with drugs, correct? I'm sorry, did you answer it?
Yes, I said I don't remember.
And this is Exhibit 8. More text between you and Mr. Depp. Feel free to look through it.
Okay.
Mr. Depp wrote, I'm all right, confused as fuck. She said nothing of last night, and most certainly not one thing of the rap party's existence. All the proof that I predicted last night. How will I look at her when she gets back professing her undying love? All a fucking lie. I for sure, unfortunately, wouldn't mind some company, but I've inundated you with too much already. Love, love, me. That's a text you received from Mr. Depp.
I don't recall.
Exhibit 9.
And this is more text between you and Mr. Depp, and you can take a look through. On November 11th, 2014, Mr. Depp wrote, "All good, haven't read her text yet. I'm feeling so fucked. Why was she at the goddamn rap party until 5 a.m.? Did Aaron say anything? The lies are so clear now. They're making me nuts, wondering what was so interesting to keep her there that goddamn long. Please ask Aaron. I must have truth. I need it. It's not the easiest thing to do at this point, though it's been a shitty and painful experience. I cannot help but hear her voice begging and crying. She wants to change and is going to change, etc. Help. I don't know what's real and what's paranoid jealousy." You received that text from Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
And you don't recall, did you recall ever Mr. Depp not feeling trust for Amber?
I don't recall.
While you were working with Mr. Depp, did he smoke marijuana?
I don't recall.
Do you recall if he took any, if not smoked marijuana, ingested marijuana in any sort of way?
I don't recall.
Exhibit 10.
Can you think of another instance where there was a patient, without giving me the patient's name or information, where they were allowed to continue to take marijuana while detoxing from other drugs?
I don't recall.
Exhibit 11 is Lloyd 2 through 5. Do you recall producing documents in this matter?
Yes.
Okay. And you produced text messages with Mr. Depp and with Ms. Heard?
Yes.
And this is a text message between you and Amber starting on December 26, 2014. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And you understand that you're in the text from you are the blue, correct?
Okay.
Right. You wrote, "Sorry to bother you. Is JD up? He has an important appointment at 2 p.m. and he isn't responding to me. Hope you guys had a beautiful Christmas." And Amber wrote, "Hey there. Yes, he is. He's opening presents with Lily Rose. What appointment is he being picked up?" Who's Lily Rose?
Johnny's daughter.
Did you ever see Mr. Depp super stoned when you were working with him?
I don't recall.
Does that mean that you never saw him stoned, or you just don't recall one way or the other?
I don't recall one way or another.
Do you know who the wit is?
Amber's sister.
Okay. Do you recall any time where Mr. Depp seemed confused about something that had occurred?
I don't.
Did you ever recall Mr. Depp wondering if he and Amber had a fight or if he was dreaming?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Mr. Depp ever not taking the medications he was prescribed?
Yes.
Okay. Did you recall Mr. Depp sometimes potentially doubling the medications that he was prescribed?
I recall thinking that at times.
Did you believe that Mr. Depp wanted to detox off of drugs? What was your answer?
Yes.
Okay. And how did Mr. Depp show you that?
It was on his own free will that he hired us to be with him.
And then did Mr. Depp have any relapses with drugs when you were working with him?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Mr. Depp and working with him ever take cocaine? Not that you necessarily saw him, but that you understood that he took cocaine.
I never saw Mr. Depp use cocaine.
Did you have any understanding that Mr. Depp took cocaine, whether you saw it or not?
I don't recall.
Did you administer drug tests to Mr. Depp?
In the beginning.
Did you see the results of the drug tests?
Yes.
Did you see Mr. Depp being positive for taking cocaine?
I don't recall.
Do you recall accompanying Mr. Depp to Australia?
Yes.
Okay. And you recall accompanying Mr. Depp to Australia in around March of 2015?
I don't remember dates.
Do you recall accompanying Mr. Depp to Australia when he was filming Pirates of the Caribbean 5?
I do.
Where were you staying in Australia in relation to Mr. Depp?
Distance-wise,
Yeah, how far away were you from him?
about 30 minutes
Okay. Where was Mr. Depp staying?
in a rental house,
And where were you staying?
in an apartment.
And what city were you in?
I don't recall the name.
Okay. And was Dr. Kipper there with you?
He came and went.
Did you fly to Australia with Mr. Depp?
Sometimes I did, and other times I flew on a commercial.
Do you recall talking to Dr. Blaustein about Mr. Depp in Australia?
I do not.
Do you recall Mr. Depp not doing very well while he was in Australia? As of March 1st, 2015.
I don't recall anything around that time.
Do you have an understanding as to what Mr. Depp was doing with Marilyn Manson?
I do not.
Did you ever tell Dr. Kipper that Mr. Depp was doing what he wants with Marilyn Manson?
I don't recall.
Do you recall Marilyn Manson being in Australia with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
It says Debbie is worried and somewhat exhausted. Do you recall being exhausted while in Australia and working with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
Do you have any reason to believe that what Dr. Kipper wrote is not true?
I do not.
We could take this down. And go back to Exhibit 1. And if we could go to Kipper 157. You see 3715?
I do.
Okay. Before I ask, do you recall how long you were in Australia with Mr. Depp?
No, however long the filming of Pirates was.
Okay. And at 3715 at 1130, you wrote, MD received a text message from client that he'd been arguing with wife and that he had cut his finger. According to patient, his assistant and security were on their way to pick him up. You wrote that?
According to my notes, yes.
Is there any reason to believe you didn't write that note?
No.
Okay. Do you recall Dr. Kipper receiving a text message from Mr. Depp about Mr. Depp cutting his finger?
I don't. I'm just what this note says.
Okay. Do you recall going to Mr. Depp's house after learning that he had cut his finger?
Yes.
What do you recall about that?
That we went to the house and I don't even think I went in at first. Dr. Kipper went in and he had cut his finger and we took him to the emergency room where his finger had been cut.
You recall what the house looked like when you went in?
Yes.
What did the house look like?
It was a mess.
Hey, can you describe how it was a mess?
I don't remember details, but I remember there was some writing on the wall and I remember a smashed TV.
Do you remember what any of the writing said on the wall?
I do not.
Did you, and you said you recalled the smashed TV?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall, was Amber in the house?
I don't recall.
Do you recall seeing Amber that day?
No, I don't recall.
Do you recall what rooms you went through of the house, Mr. Depp's house?
I remember looking for his finger in the downstairs area.
And what was in the downstairs area? But what rooms were in the downstairs area?
It was like a pool table entertainment room.
Did you look anywhere else around the house?
I don't recall.
What was the pool table entertainment room? Was that a mess?
I don't recall.
Do you recall going into the kitchen of the house?
I don't recall.
Do you recall finding Mr. Depp's finger?
I did not.
Do you know who found Mr. Depp's finger?
Yes.
Who?
Ben.
Ben who?
I don't remember his last name.
And who was Ben in relation to Mr. Depp?
He was like our house manager.
Do you recall where the finger was found?
I do not.
Do you recall if Mr. Depp appeared to have dirt, grime, and paint on his hands?
Yes, he did. He did.
Do you recall seeing any glass anywhere?
I do not.
Do you recall smelling any alcohol?
I do not.
Who else was with you when you went to the hospital?
Malcolm and Stephen.
And who were Malcolm and Stephen?
Stephen was his assistant, and Malcolm was one of his security guards.
Do you recall who was holding the piece of finger that had been cut?
Ben brought it to the ER.
What did Ben bring the finger in?
I don't recall.
Was it on ice, the finger?
I don't recall.
Did you ask Mr. Depp how he cut his finger?
I don't recall if I asked him.
Did you ask anyone how Mr. Depp had cut his finger?
I don't recall.
Do you have any understanding as to how Mr. Depp cut his finger?
I heard different stories from people.
What were the different stories you heard?
I had heard that Amber threw a bottle of vodka at him. I had heard that he slammed it with a phone.
Do you recall who you heard that Amber had thrown a bottle at him?
I do not.
Do you recall who you heard that he slammed it on with the phone?
I do not.
The stories that you had heard, did you hear it on that day of March 7th or March 8th, 2015, or later?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you ever talk with Mr. Depp about how he cut his finger?
I don't recall conversations.
Okay. Did you ever talk with Dr. Kipper about how Mr. Depp cut his finger?
I don't recall specific conversations.
Did Mr. Depp, how long was Mr. Depp in the hospital for?
I don't remember.
Did you have any concerns about the nurse supervision of Mr. Depp?
I know at times we would go days without me seeing him, but I don't know specifically what this is regarding.
Were there issues with the nurse supervision while in Australia?
I don't recall specifics.
You have no recollection of of Dr. Kipper withdrawing his care of Mr. Depp for any period of time?
No. I know at times it was discussed when he would miss appointments, but I don't recall him ever actually going through with withdrawing his care.
Do you recall there being concerns about Mr. Depp taking substances that he shouldn't have been taking?
I don't recall what that was regarding.
Do you recall having major concerns about leaving for Australia with Mr. Depp?
I do not.
While that's going up, Ms. Lloyd, the day that Mr. Depp cut his finger, you don't recall seeing Amber one way or the other, is that right?
I do not.
Exhibit 16 is Lloyd 140 through 145. And Mr. Depp responded, "It's sad. I love you so much, little Debbie." And of course, Kipper too. He was right, though I did feel a bit of a sting when his letter, paper trail, arrived on the off chance that I croak, which I also understand. Just never heard of anyone being fired by their physician before. So I'm kind of proud of that little fact too. I love you, kid. Even attempting saying thank you to you would be like a monkey trying to fuck a football. It's just simply impossible. I wish things could have ended on a better note. All my love, Nurse Shark, JD. Do you recall receiving this text from Mr. Depp?
I don't.
This text was on your phone, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Would Mr. Depp call you Nurse Shark?
Yes.
Would Mr. Depp call you Little Debbie?
Yes.
And okay. And you don't recall Mr. Depp saying never heard of anyone being fired by their physician before?
I do not.
And then you respond on the next page. I love you too and hope this is not the end. Be safe and be smart, my son. You sent that text to Mr. Depp.
According to this, yes.
Okay. And do you know what you meant by be safe and be smart?
I don't know.
And then Mr. Depp wrote, I've been off of for 3 days. The doc jumped the gun. Also, please thank him for the Motrin and the baclofen. They work a treat for amputated fingers. Goddamn, I love that weird fucker no matter what. You received that text from Mr. Depp.
According to this.
Do you understand what is meant by I've been off of for 3 days?
I do have no idea.
Okay. You respond, so glad to hear you have been off. No matter what, I just want you to feel better.
Yeah, I don't know what we were referring to.
And we go down to the next page. You write, I'd be more than happy to come back and help you with pain management and Taradol injections. I know Kipper loves you and would always want to continue your care if you're no longer using. You wrote that to Mr. Depp?
According to this.
And this text was on your phone, correct?
Correct.
And what did you mean by Kipper loves you and would always want to continue your care if you're no longer using?
I don't know just what it says.
No longer using?
I don't know what that was regarding.
You don't know what no longer using is referring to?
I do not.
And then Mr. Depp wrote, I don't know, I'm going to stop it all except whatever I was on before and just deal with it. You received that text from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Do you know what he was referring to where he said, I'm going to stop it all except whatever I was on before and just deal with it?
I do not know what that's regarding.
And then you wrote, I respect whatever decisions you'll make. I'll be sad to leave the crew as I love you all. I hope to always be in touch, even if you choose not to continue a working relationship. Miss you already. I will get in touch with Kevin and get my stuff out. 472 soon. Hugs. You wrote that message to Mr. Depp.
According to this.
Okay. And then Mr. Depp wrote, take care, darling. I cannot ever thank you enough, all you've done for me. On the junkie side and the broken heart side, you've been a lifesaver. Literally. We'll be seeing each other again, sweetheart. Love you so much, little Debbie. And so does my entire crew. X. You received that text message from Mr. Depp?
according to this, yes. I'm gonna cry. It's just-
Miss Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit Lloyd 17, which is Lloyd 158 through 160, which is a text message between you and Johnny Depp from your phone. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And on March 27th, 2015, you wrote, "Good morning, sleepyhead. Aaron came by to give you a shot. You were still sleeping. Take the pill form of Tadorol to hold you over, and I will check in with you when I'm done my appointment in Beverly Hills." And then you wrote, "Have you taken pill? If not, hold off, and Erin is on her way to give you injection." You see that?
Yes.
Okay. And you wrote that text message, correct? Or those messages?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the next page, Mr. Depp wrote, "The fucking pain is as bad as when it was cut off. Horrific." You received that message from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
And he's talking about his finger there, correct?
Yes.
And you received that text message from Amber, correct?
Correct.
Right. And then you wrote, "He's at the studio with Marcus and is supposed to call me when he gets back to the lofts. I will drive up there if you want me to. Always feel weird showing up unexpected. Do you want me to go?" You wrote that text message to Amber?
I don't recall, but according to this, yes.
Do you know who Marcus is?
Yes.
Who is Marcus?
Marcus Mumford,
And what was his relationship to Mr. Depp?
friend.
Okay. And then you wrote, "I know Steven is there. Let me just check in and see what I can find out. I'll get right back to you." So who is Steven?
His assistant.
All right. Do you ever remember checking if Mr. Depp had been taking cocaine?
I don't remember specifically asking any questions related to that.
Is there any reason to believe that you didn't do what you said in your text message?
No.
Do you recall what you were giving Mr. Depp Valium for?
I do not.
Ms. Lloyd, showing you again what's been marked as Exhibit 1, and I'm going to point you to Kipper 167, which is from April 13th, 2015. Okay, do you see it? You see the entry for 1,500?
Yes.
All right. You wrote, "Bandage changed and hand exercises done at appointment with surgeon's office. Per RN at surgeon's office and occupational therapist, hand is healing well and finger has good range of motion. Exercises to be done 3 to 5 times per day. Patient is in good spirits and said he's not smoked marijuana in 3 days. States he feels majority of his issues with his wife have been from him using drugs and alcohol. Patient states he will no longer sneak, use, and wants to enjoy clarity." You wrote that?
Yes.
And these are part of your nurse's notes?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Depp told you that he felt the majority of his issues with his wife had been from him using drugs and alcohol?
According to the note, yes.
And Mr. Depp wrote he will no longer sneak, use, and wants to enjoy clarity?
According to the document, yes.
What is being referred to as no longer sneak, use?
I only know what's stated in my notes.
Okay. Would it be anything other than drugs or alcohol?
I don't recall.
Was there anything that Mr. Depp was sneaking other than drugs and alcohol that you were concerned about?
I don't recall.
If we go to 175, Kipper 175 on this page, on this document, it's notes for June 28th, 2015.
June
It says at 1700, RN received initial results from brain MRI. No obvious abnormalities noted. Final report will be done tomorrow. Patient informed of results. Do you recall why Mr. Depp received the brain MRI?
He was having chronic headaches.
And then you see at 6:30 at 1300.
Yes.
Okay. And that's highlighted.
Yeah.
Okay. You wrote RN arrived on set to visit patient. He was upset due to having an argument with his wife. Patient stated he had taken about 4 Xanax, 1 milligram over the past 24 hours to deal with the stress he was feeling. Patient was able to express his emotions appropriately. Patient stated that he had not slept the night before due to argument with his wife. That's a note you wrote?
Correct.
Okay. And that's based off of information provided to you by Mr. Depp?
I don't recall.
Well, we're
According to my note, yes.
So Mr. Depp told you he'd taken about 4 Xanax, 1 milligram over the past 24 hours, correct?
According to my notes, yes.
Okay, and then at 1920 on June 30th, it said patient had another argument with his wife. Patient was anxious and was asking for medication to help calm him down. Seroquel 50 milligrams administered. You see that?
Yes.
And that's a note you wrote?
Yes.
Do you know why your nursing notes ended on July 1st, 2015?
I do not.
How did you continue to care for Mr. Depp as his nurse after July 1st, 2015?
I do not recall my last date.
Okay. Did you prepare nursing notes through the time that you were Mr. Depp's nurse?
I did.
Okay. And did you provide those notes to Dr. Kipper?
I did.
This, Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit Lloyd 19. This is an email from Dr. David Culber on June 27th, 2015 that you were copied on. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you know who Dr. Culber is?
I don't recall exactly who he was.
Did you understand that Mr. Depp went to a specialist for his finger?
Yes.
Okay. You're copied on this email?
I see my name copied on the email, yes.
Okay. And you recall that Mr. Depp was treated for a bad crush injury for his finger?
I recall him being treated for a finger injury. I didn't realize, this is the first I remember hearing it was a crush injury.
And that's the email you received from Dr. Culber, correct?
I'm seeing this today. I don't recall receiving this email.
Okay, is there any reason you believe you didn't receive this email?
No.
Okay.
I just don't recall.
Ms. Lloyd, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 20, which is a text message chain between you and Mr. Depp from your phone. You see that?
I see that.
On July 5th, 2015, Mr. Depp wrote to you, canceling the squeezing and needles tonight. Need to get the recluse out of his cage and his brain. You received that text message from Mr. Depp?
Yes.
Okay. And then you said, how come you're canceling? You okay? Not sure what you mean by the rest of your text. Please let me know if you need anything. I'm here if you want to chat or want me to go hang at the house with you. You wrote that text to Mr. Depp?
Yes.
And then Mr. Depp wrote to you, I'm in a very anxious and painfully confused state. Rather not get into details, but in a nutshell, problems with family, my company, the ex, business manager, and my fucking jumbled brain will need refills of meds tomorrow. Thanks, honey, X. You received that text from Mr. Depp?
According to this, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Depp talked about how he was having problems with his family.
That's what this states.
And Mr. Depp was having problems with his company.
That's what this states.
And Mr. Depp was having problems with the ex.
That's what this states.
And Mr. Depp was having problems with his business manager.
according to this text.
And Mr. Depp was having trouble with his fucking jumbled brain, correct?
According to this text.
I'm just going back to Exhibit 1 for a moment. If we can go back to Kipper 167. And Ms. Lloyd, I'd ask you to look at the entries for April 14th. It's at the bottom.
Okay.
You wrote at 1400, RN and MD arrived at patient's home to have meeting to set treatment plan and boundaries while traveling in Australia. You wrote that?
Correct.
And the RN is you, correct?
Yes.
And the MD is Dr. Kipper, correct?
Correct.
And do you recall what the treatment plans and boundaries were while traveling in Australia as of April 2015?
I do not recall.
And then if we go to the next page, you see the April 15th entries?
Yes.
Okay. And at 12:15, you write, arrived at patient's home, assistant was in hallway and informed RN that patient was in a bad mood and told assistant he did not need anything from him today. RN was led in home by security and knocked on patient's door to let him know she was there. Patient screamed, "What?" RN informed patient she was letting him know she was there and would be downstairs. About 5 minutes later, security came into house and informed RN that patient has told security to get everyone out of his home and he did not want any more unexpected guests. RN left property and informed MD of the events. Per MD, drop tomorrow's meds off with security and do not reach out to patient again. Wait for patient to reach out to medical team. You wrote that note?
Correct.
And this document also, this note also talks about you informing Dr. Kipper about what happened in this note, correct?
Yes.
This Lloyd, I'm showing what's been marked as Lloyd 21. You see at April 15th at the bottom, there's a text from Mr. Depp.
Yes.
And he wrote, "Hey, sweetheart, I'm so sorry about today. I thought you were Steven, whom I'm not particularly enthused about for his loss of loyalty and his loss of memory. He has tried everything to fuck me over as far as traveling with my wife. He also bursts into my fucking house like it's goddamn Grand Central Station. I'm truly sorry if I upset you. If you like, you can give me some morphine to see if my tongue and penis touch. All my love, Jay." Did you receive this text from Mr. Depp?
It appears so. I don't, yes.
Okay. Do you have any understanding as to what Mr. Depp was referring to where he says, Steven tried everything to fuck me over as far as traveling with my wife?
I do.
First of all, going back to your work for Dr. Kipper, you said, I think you testified earlier, you cared for multiple patients that were of Dr. Kipper's, correct?
Correct.
And when you would care for Dr. Kipper's patients, how would you report their status to Dr. Kipper?
Objection vague.
Multiple different resources, phones, texts, verbal and written.
And how often would you report to Dr. Kipper about his patients?
It responded, I mean, it depended on different patients, varied.
And I believe you testified earlier that you maintain nursing notes for those patients, correct?
Correct.
What type of information did you maintain in these notes?
And mainly we provide care given and patients' responses to care given or any external factors that could affect the patient.
Is there any information that you would not include in your notes?
Not,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your answer.
not specifically.
Other than Dr. Kipper, does anyone else review your notes?
If another nurse was to work on the case, they could have access to the notes.
And does Dr. Kipper advise you on any information that should be maintained in your notes?
Not directly.
Has he ever told you that certain information should not be included in your notes?
No.
When did you become a registered nurse?
2004.
And have you been employed as a registered nurse from that time up until you became a nurse practitioner?
Yes.
In your time as a registered nurse, have you ever had a patient that you suspected was the victim of domestic abuse?
No.
Do you have any professional responsibility to report domestic abuse?
Yes.
And what is that responsibility?
I'm a mandated reporter for child elder abuse and any suspected injuries.
How would you define suspected injuries?
If I was to work in a facility and somebody came in and reported, or I felt that it was a result from an injury caused by somebody else.
Who do you report the abuse to in that instance?
I've never had to report abuse.
Okay. Given your professional responsibility, do you know who you would report that to in that event?
I do not.
In your time as a registered nurse, have you ever witnessed physical violence by one of your patients?
I do not recall ever witnessing any violence.
And when you say any violence, does that mean perpetrated by your patient or against your patient, or just
in general violence?
So you met Mr. Depp either on June 11th or June 12th of 2014?
According to my notes, yes.
Okay. And had you ever spoken with him before that date?
No.
When did you first meet Ms. Heard?
I don't recall.
Do you recall when you first met her? Not specifically when, but do you recall the instance when you first met her?
I do not.
When you first met Ms. Heard, did you have an understanding as to what her relationship to Mr. Depp was at that time?
Yes.
And what was that understanding?
That they were in a relationship.
Were they engaged when you first met them?
I don't recall the dates they got engaged.
Were they married when you first met them?
No.
Did you attend their wedding?
Yes.
And where was that?
On the island in the Bahamas.
Can we take this down and please pull up what I've marked as document B?
But 23.
Now, just for the record, I believe these are the nursing notes you were looking at earlier. This just has a different production number, and I just thought it might go more smoothly if I am calling out the correct page number. So just to establish this, do you recognize this document here?
Yes.
And these are your nursing notes that I believe you looked at with
with Mr. Nagelhoff earlier, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'd like to direct your attention to the entry for June 17th of 2014, which is on page with, perfect, there it is. This is a note you prepared, correct?
Correct.
And at the time that you prepared this note, were you in Boston with Mr. Depp?
According to the note, yes.
Now, in the subsection that says to 2330, do you see where it says accompanied patient, fiance, assistance, and security to concert?
Yes.
Okay. And in this note, patient refers to Mr. Depp. Is that right?
Yes.
And fiance is Ms. Heard?
Yes.
Just refresh your recollection that Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard were engaged in June of 2014?
According to this, yes.
Is this the first time you met Ms. Heard?
I don't recall when I met her.
Further down in the note, do you see where it says assistant was also asked to pass on RN and MD's numbers to fiance, as we would both like to speak with her and to obtain her input towards patient treatment. You see where I'm referring to?
Yep.
Okay. RN is referring to you in this instance?
Correct.
And MD refers to Dr. Kipper?
Correct.
Do you recall why you wanted to speak with Ms. Heard at this time?
I do not.
Do you recall Ms. Heard expressing interest in participating in Mr. Depp's treatment?
I don't remember the events other than what's stated in my notes.
Your phone number was given to Ms. Heard, though, correct?
Correct.
The 24th.
Ms. Lloyd, do you recognize this document?
No.
So I take it you did not prepare this document, is that correct?
Correct.
Directing your attention to the bottom of the page.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's probably a good break to go ahead and have our lunch break. So we'll go ahead and break until 2 o'clock. Do not discuss the case with anybody. Don't do any outside research, okay? We'll come back and continue this deposition. All right. So we're tuning at 2 p.m., correct? All right. Okay, thank you.
All rise.